Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this closing session of the Virtual Ocean Dialogues with me, Dominic Warre, the Managing Director at the World Economic Forum. It's a delight to be with you. The Virtual Ocean Dialogues have been hosted all this week by the Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum. They've been the first ever completely virtual open event. A big thank you to the Benioff Ocean Initiative and Mark and Lynn Benioff, who kindly sponsored the Friends of Ocean Action. Now, the Virtual Ocean Dialogues have brought together leaders and influencers from civil society, governments, business, the scientific community from around the world. The dialogues were created to connect communities, to share and to scale innovation, solutions and action that can benefit the ocean worldwide and help to deliver the target of SDG 14, the ocean goal. The outcome from the Virtual Ocean Dialogues will be presented to the hosts and organizers of the UN Ocean Conference to be held in due course in Lisbon, Portugal in 2021. Now, to all our friends around the world, our ocean friends in the United States right now and others, as friends of the Ocean Action community, we are all united in our rejection of racism and discrimination in all its forms. Marine life comes in all colors of the rainbow and in all variations of gender, shape and size. And like our own humanity, this precious diversity is a blessing which requires all of us to work actively and together across boundaries to save it, restore it, and help it flourish today and for our future generations. So with our ocean, so with our humanity. So this has been an incredible week for the Virtual Ocean Dialogues. We've had over 50 sessions, 304 speakers across 54 countries, the prime ministers of Bangladesh, Canada, Fiji, New Zealand and Norway, the presidents of Costa Rica, Kenya and Palau, 54 other government ministers, 51 academics and science organizations, 124 civil society organizations, and NGOs represented, 72 business representatives, and may I say, a 50-50 split between women to men on all the panelists and speakers. So we've had a great week of discussion, and this incredible lineup has been watched by 630,000 live stream viewers, not counting all of you watching right now, and 3.4 million views on Instagram. That makes it the biggest outreach on the ocean ever. How incredible and exciting is that? But we're not quite yet done. We've got a fantastic closing panel for you and some wonderful words coming up from the President of Kenya and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal, who will be co-hosting the UN Ocean Conference in 2021. But before we get there, here's a quick quiz, which you can do on slido.com if you can see it on your screen, or simply by scanning the QR code, which you can also see on the screen with your phone. We've got some questions for you, which you'll be able to see, and we want you to answer them, and then we'll look at the responses afterwards. And while you're doing that, we'll have some words from the President of Kenya and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal. You can see the questions now. What gives you the most hope in the recovery towards a healthy ocean? Science and research, technology, innovation, government action, private sector engagement, youth movements, changing consumer behavior. Choose your option and press your button. And secondly, on a scale of 1 to 5, how optimistic are you that we can improve the state of the ocean? We asked these questions at the beginning of the dialogue. We're asking them again now. And while you continue to submit your answers, we're delighted to have some opening remarks from the UN Ocean Conference co-hosts, which will now be in 21. First, we do have a message from President Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of Kenya.
Greetings to you all from whichever part of the world you are participating in this event. And please accept my very best wishes to you and all your families for good health and happiness despite the difficult times we all face. Indeed, as you're all aware, the 2020 UN Conference on Oceans was scheduled to be co-hosted by Kenya and Portugal in Lisbon between the 2nd and the 6th of June 2020. But because of the unfortunate circumstances that have prevailed globally as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were forced to postpone this meeting. But let me also hasten to assure you that we are committed towards ensuring that this conference will eventually take place when conditions allow. In the meantime, however, we will maintain the momentum on the critical agenda of SDG 14, conserve and sustainably use of our oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development through dialogues such as the one we're having together today. I would like at this point to thank the World Economic Forum and the Friends of Ocean Action for organizing the virtual ocean dialogue during the first week of June. I want to congratulate all the scientists, representatives from various governments, the private sector, the CSOs, who took part in the many panels that were the heart of our week's interactions. Ladies and gentlemen, for the last 2 years, I have had the pleasure of serving on the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, a panel that has been co-chaired by the President of Palau and the Prime Minister of Norway. Our high-level panel seeks to deepen knowledge and broaden political support for a global approach to sustainability and to produce more from our oceans, as well as to more effectively protect and preserve our oceans, which are an irreplaceable marine biodiversity. We look forward to integrating the findings of the high-level panel into the UN Ocean Conference agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, the governments of Kenya, Canada, and Japan have previously co-hosted the Sustainable Blue Economy Conference in Nairobi in November of 2018. And since that time, the issue of sustainability has taken center stage in the discussion of our blue economy. Indeed, as I have said before, we hold out natural assets in custody for our future generations. And we therefore need today to jealously guard them from unsustainable exploitation. We must also, I believe, provide additional financial resources to invest both in our blue and green programs that will support the sustainable future that humanity is calling for. I therefore want to take this special moment to endorse the message, especially from our young people around the world who are challenging us, the current leaders, to manage our natural resources more responsibly in order to ensure a healthy and thriving ocean environment that will protect not just our coastal regions and populations, but indeed the world as a whole, and also support us in our endeavor to build resilience against climate change. I want to thank you all for your participation in the virtual ocean dialogues, and be assured of a very, very warm welcome at the UN Ocean Conference when we meet again to advance the cause of SDG 14, and that is to conserve and sustainably use our oceans' resources. I want to once again Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, the President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta. Next, we have a great pleasure to welcome some comments from Augusto Santos Silva, who's the Minister of State and Foreign Affairs of Portugal. He speaks on behalf of the Prime Minister of Portugal, who unfortunately, understandably, is unable to offer some words just now owing to the emerging and ongoing COVID-19 crisis in Portugal. But Minister of State and Foreign Affairs of Portugal, Augusto Santos Silva, please.
First of all, let me thank the Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum for organizing this virtual ocean dialogue, a very important and timely initiative. The idea is to keep the momentum. It is very important that the international community reinforces its commitment on the ocean. Preserving the oceans is one of the key goals of our common agenda for sustainable development, the 2030 Agenda. The Ocean Conference was scheduled for Lisbon this June, organized by Portugal and Kenya. Unfortunately, the pandemic, COVID-19, forced us to postpone the conference. But just to postpone, not to cancel it. We shall see each other soon in Lisbon, in the context of the Ocean Conference organized by Portugal and Kenya and hosted by Portugal. So it is very important to keep all our efforts together, favoring the ocean governance, and the ocean development. And three dimensions are critical, very critical. The dimension of communication, the dimension of partnerships, and the agenda dimension. The agenda, the dimension of solutions. First, communication. It is very important to keep the ocean issue clearly in our common agenda and clearly in our debates, in our public debates, mobilizing all the civil society, mobilizing our public opinions. Secondly, partnership. It's not only an affair of governments. It's not only an affair of international organizations. This is an issue that has to be committed, that needs the commitment, the engagement of all humanity. And thirdly, and most important, the agenda of solutions. The Ocean Conference needs words, of course, and words are very important, but most of all needs solutions, needs an action plan, and we have to build together this action plan. The ocean is crucial for the economy. You have to think in terms of blue economy. Ocean is critical for climate action, the climate agenda, the fulfillment of our commitments following the Paris Agreement needs a clear reinforcement of our action towards ocean issues. And of course, ocean is critical for preserving biodiversity. Ocean is critical for assuring the international mobility of human beings and international trade of goods and commodities. So for all these reasons, it is very, very important, this virtual ocean dialogue. I thank the opportunity to participate on behalf of the Portuguese government. I congratulate the Friends of Ocean Action and Economic World Forum for organizing, and we shall see each other soon in Lisbon, because we are preparing for a new schedule, but we are preparing a robust agenda for our second Ocean Conference to be organized by Portugal and Kenya and to be hosted here in Lisbon by Portugal.
Thank you so much, Augusto Santos Silva, the Minister of State and Foreign Affairs of Portugal. And thank you both to him and to the President of Kenya for their inspiring words. And may I say, all of the support that they've provided all this week on behalf of the Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum. We're really looking forward to continue to work with them to take the outcomes from these virtual ocean dialogues and feed them into the UN Ocean Conference when it does take place next year in Lisbon. So I hope while we've been talking and listening to those esteemed colleagues from around the world, you've been managing to undertake your survey results. Let's take a look and see what we have come up with from your survey results. Have we got the responses that we're able to see? Here comes the Slido. Very interesting indeed. It says that what gives you most optimism for the recovery for a healthy ocean? Government action has come out loud and clear. Now that is interesting because when we started this at the beginning of the week, people were most keen on science and research. What this has maybe shown that over the course of the week, we've engaged so many ministers, so many decision makers that you feel optimistic that we're getting through. So this puts us in good stead for the Ocean Conference in Lisbon coming up next year, government action. Now, the second one, which is all about kind of what makes you feel optimistic on a scale of 1 to 5. How strongly do you think the ocean can play a role in the global recovery? Look at that. Very strongly indeed, bar 5. An excellent result. Thank you very much for voting in there. That gives us lots of hope that we're maybe creating a bit of cut through with these dialogues. Okay, so thank you for that. And let us now segue into our amazing closing panel for the virtual ocean dialogues. If you recall, the overall theme for the dialogues was to connect communities, to break down silos, to break down barriers, to break down prejudices, and create new innovations, new ideas, a new mobilization for action on the ocean in line with SDG 14. So we're very keen to hear what our panelists have to say, to see how we did, see if we managed to break down those barriers, create connections. I'm delighted to welcome some of the world's leading younger voices on the ocean for this closing panel. First of all, I'm delighted to welcome Emer Manning, who is the Eco-UNESCO All-Atlantic Ocean Youth Ambassador and the Ambassador for Sharks for Kids. That's the best title I've heard all week. Emer, welcome very much to the panel. Looking forward to hearing your contributions. Next, I'd very much like to welcome Mieli Zana Andri Amahe Fazafi from Madagascar. That's not bad. People have trouble with my surname, Wore. They say Wore a lot. So welcome very much, Mieli, and very much interested in your contributions. You are a marine social scientist and a researcher at Institute of Zoology in Oxford, but originally from Madagascar, so very, very keen on that background. Sorry, I shouldn't say Oxford. I should say Lausanne, University of Lausanne, just down the road from us here in Geneva, because in fact, it's our next panelist, Alifa Binta Hawk, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Zoology, University of Dhaka, and a DPhil candidate at the Department of Zoology in the University of Oxford. So welcome, Alifa, to the panel. And joining this next generation of experts is, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, you're a slightly more seasoned but ever sensational activist and leader on the ocean and natural resource space, and that's M. Sanyayan, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Conservation International. So welcome to all of you to this panel. And Emer, perhaps we can start with you, if we may, to get us going. And I know that you're very keen on this connectivity between experts and youth. So I'm wondering how you might kind of offer us some thoughts on how experts can successfully engage youth in ocean sustainability issues. Emer, over to you.
Certainly. First of all, thank you very much to the World Ocean Forum and for Friends of Ocean Action for inviting me to speak today. So I want to preface by saying that technically I am still a youth, and I've been working with youth that are younger than me for the past decade. So Before I start about how we can successfully engage youth, I want to just take a quick note as to say why it's so important. So the most recent census has come out to say that youth, as defined by the UN, who are 30 years old or younger, make up about 50% of the population. So those voices are really valuable and should be integrated into policy, strategy, and projects that are happening with regards to ocean stewardship. So what we find in my line of work is that, unfortunately, young people are often considered immature because they don't have the life experience to be considered an expert in a field. But what we want to put across is that youth are experts. They're experts in their own priorities and in their own needs, and that shouldn't be looked down upon. Those are the needs and priorities that could help to change the world. So my advice on how to engage youth in science is to actively invite them to be a voice. Don't create something and then test it on youth. Actually have them sitting at the table from the start. I also want to say, and I have this written down in front of me so I don't get it wrong, I would like to echo the words of Ambassador Thompson earlier in this week when he said that he would like scientists and experts to reach out past habitual communities to the ones that you interact with every day and to broaden that sphere. And I want to also add to that to say how important that is to add youth voices into the mix. Lastly, I've also noticed that more and more webinars have been coming out recently, and webinars are absolutely fantastic, but there are so many. And I want to say, especially when it comes to involving younger than I, don't be afraid to get creative with science and with the ways that you engage youth. So you could have at-home challenges or online film screenings and then a Q&A afterwards, or simple coffee mornings where you invite youth to come and talk to you and your colleagues or you in your lab. Finally, if you are having trouble finding the right young people, feel free to reach out on social media, feel free to reach out to local youth organizations, or even come and talk to me and I'll help you find the young person right for your ideas. So the bottom line is just talk to us and ask us to be involved. We want to see the changes that you want as well. So yeah, just reach out.
Uma, thank you so much. I'm sure you'll get flooded with questions and asks to open up your youth network on science and ocean. It's interesting you say that about that connection. And I wonder if, in your opinion, what do you think the most important thing is that for those who are not in the scientific community, but are kind of interested and want to engage in the ocean and ocean stewardship? You mentioned a couple of ideas there, but how would you kind of encourage people to get engaged? Because sometimes the science can seem so difficult to understand that people might feel a bit shy about trying to help.
Absolutely. And so there's a lot of people in the world that are very interested in science and want to get involved in science, but there's a difference in those people's mindsets between being interested in science and actually sitting down to read a scientific paper or scientific literature. That can be really hard if you're not specifically trained in how to do that and in some of the terminology that's used. So what we do is we tend to go for a more tangible route to introduce young people into the idea that there are organizations out there that do care about what they care about and are actively working towards them. And the easiest way we found to do that is by promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. So we work a lot with young people. We are SDG champions in UNESCO, and we push the Sustainable Development Goals. They're easy to use, they're easy to navigate. There is so much research and work done behind them that they are easy to grasp. So the first thing that I would say is don't be afraid to promote those goals. The second thing that I would say is teach people how they can genuinely make a difference. So we find a lot of the times with media, in order to keep people's hopes up, they tend to pick an issue that is more easily solved than others. So we see a lot of media kind of focusing on the plastics issue in the ocean. And as wonderful as it is, if a family starts reducing their plastic consumption, that's not necessarily the best thing to actually stop climate change. So what we would say is sit down and actually have those difficult conversations and have those difficult teachings about what can genuinely make a difference. And usually that leads to a conversation about policy and advocacy. And I want to stress that young people do want to make a difference. That's the whole reason they've gotten into this environmental field. So if they continue down the path of following media, they could get disheartened because they're realizing that their actions aren't actually making as much of a difference as they hope to be. So we're trying to encourage everyone to have those hard conversations, talk about policy, talk about advocacy, and work with youth to get them out there and to really make your research matter.
Imo, thank you so much for that. They're very, very good practical words. I'm sure if people followed you, they'd be able to get good links on some of the materials and things and find out more about Sharks for Kids, which sounds very intriguing. But we don't have quite enough time to dive into that one, but I'd love to come back to that. Now, Miali Zana Andra Ahamehe Fazifi, marine social scientist and researcher at the Institute of Geography and Sustainability, University of Lausanne. Sorry for mixing you up with Oxford University earlier, but Lausanne is I won't say this because our next panelist will contest that, but Lausanne, just down the road from us here in Geneva, fantastic university. We're delighted to have you with us. And it's clear from what we've been hearing all week that we need to get this balance right between nature and humanity, and the idea of kind of what we can learn from perhaps more local communities as well as large-scale models and big science. And so from your work and from your experience in this space, do you think there's anything we can learn from perhaps fishing communities or others that you've worked with that can help us bridge these divides between the science and how we can help protect and restore the ocean?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Yeah, I think there is a lot we can learn from fishing communities, and just as was said before, that sometimes science can be difficult, to reach, but actually science also learn from fishing communities, for example. And one thing that I found really important is that we can learn how to view our relationship with the ocean and with each other differently from fishing communities. When you see, for example, fishers fishing and feeding their family, and also sustaining an entire community, you realize the importance of fish. And at the same time, you also realize the need to protect the ocean, not only for conservation purposes, which is SDG 14, but it's also for the benefit of so many people that depend on the ocean. And I think that's something that we can learn. Something else that I found also very interesting is that fishing communities teach us that we can adapt from a changing climate and also from external pressure, for example. The fact that fishing communities have continued to maintain their livelihoods for so many years, granted with challenges, it shows us that there is an alternative way, and that even a smaller scale fishing can provide so much benefit for the environment and also for the communities around. And I also think something that recently has struck me is that there is a lot more voices that are given to local fishers, to small scale fishing, and then to coastal communities. And I think this increased voice around the world has also showed us that it is important to make our voice heard. Even if you're marginalized, even if you're a minority, when you're faced with a lack of fairness and a lack of justice, we can stand for ourselves, and we have to. And I'm really pleased that I've learned that during my journey and my research, that fishing communities have really built this strong voice, and with the help of many around, obviously. But I think it's something that we can learn at this time where we think that we're sometimes powerless with the things around us. And I think this resilience of fishing community is something very important for us to learn.
Miali, that's so fascinating, because you've taken us into such different territory. People would sometimes think about the ocean as quite a scientific issue, but almost if you imagine the different sustainable development goals, you've broken us out of SDG 14. You've taken us into environment and peace and justice and livelihoods and food security, all of which is wrapped up together with the viewpoint for a just and peaceful and sustainable role for the fisher folk and the fishing communities. And sometimes I suppose people don't think about that actually the ocean can be so connected to many of these other topics. That's so fascinating. Tell me, from your studies and what you're seeing, we had that survey about optimism for the future. How do you see the future of fisheries in our ocean and these kinds of livelihoods? Should we be quite concerned? Are there reasons for some optimism? Do we need to do more to get these voices into the debate, for example, in the conference when it takes place properly in Lisbon, or into dialogues like this?
Yeah, I think we have reached a point where we know how to manage the fisheries better, and also how to reverse decreasing trends. So I think that's very much a big reason for optimism. We learned a lot from this week's dialogue on how various sectors and actors can be involved, from responsible sourcing to removing harmful subsidies. We have the opportunity in all sectors to make the change happen. We will probably need to make difficult decisions, though, that may affect political or economic interest. But I think there is more and more awareness that we need to make changes, not only at the fishing level, but also at a systemic and a systematic level to address the issue. So, for example, as we've heard all this week, governments have now embraced a blue economy agenda around the world. And I think there is a real opportunity here for fisheries to be a drive for change, and also for government to prod themselves in bringing a blue economy that is more inclusive and also more just for all stakeholders involved, including the fishing communities. So yes, there is reason for optimism, but there is still a bit of work to do.
A little bit of work to do. Very interesting. What, if I may, from what you've sort of seen, what are some of the sort of practical things that some of the fishing communities have done that have really inspired you, and you think that's a really good idea that can be scaled, or a breakthrough that they've made, or a change in a policy, or an activity that has given you quite some hope that we can work with them and scale up some of these great ideas that they have?
Yeah, I think one of them that is actually now really taking off in the Indian Ocean is this idea of locally managed marine areas, where fishing communities have organized themselves to manage their resources and the area. And another one is the increasing this voice, this policy voice of fishers and local communities that I've really seen, like fishers that come into international meetings and making a voice in front of like stronger actors and giving that those stories of their livelihoods. And I think I've seen that have given a real impact, where decisions were not just made by people at the table that are so far away from the fishing and in offices that can hear what is happening with the fisher. And I think that's an important lesson that we definitely need to scale, and then bring more voices at the table, especially at those difficult like negotiation or discussion of quotas, for example.
Miali, that's so fascinating to hear, and actually is a lovely segue into our next panelist, and that might be, if I can turn to you, Alifa, because we're on the cusp of this UN Decade of Ocean Science and knowledge, and of course, while we need new innovation to take forward new breakthroughs and such, this concept that Miali was just talking about of local knowledge, traditional sources of knowledge. Perhaps sometimes that's overlooked in these big dialogues and debates and large conferences. Could that be a missing link, do you think, between the kind of local and the global that we're hearing in this discussion? Alifa, I'd be very interested in your comments and thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Dominic. And thank you, Miali. That actually set a perfect platform from what I have to say about this missing link of the traditional knowledge that are found through thousands of years of experience fishing at sea. I just would like to say, as you have just said, Dominic, that from 2021 to 2030 is going to be the UN Ocean Decade for Science. And when we talk about science, the first thing that comes to our mind is data, right? Trustworthy, standardized data that would give us understanding of this complex system so that we come up with better solutions, right? But we also have to understand that to try and understand the ocean and the pressures it's seeing in recent decades, and how it responds and how it responded in the past. And to predict what's going to happen throughout these changes needs deep diving of understanding not only of the present, but also what happened to the ocean in the past as well. Especially in the resource constrained scenarios whereby data sometimes is very, very difficult to obtain. Most of the recent papers I have read in the Indian Ocean starts with a single line: this region is data poor. Now, if you want to really have a decade of ocean science, while data is extremely important, you have to understand that in many countries, like the developing countries, whereby population is higher, resource are constraints, government is struggling to allocate the resources into science and data collection into such things, you have to come up with frugal, innovative ideas of how to collect this data that has longer term impacts. We know that 99% of the habitat in the marine areas lack basic understanding for management. That's the scale is unimaginable, right? But one thing we're also forgetting, that within these areas there is 138 million people, a huge subset of which goes for fishing every day. A cumulative experience of these fishers are more than thousands of years. They understand their water better. I love to call this wisdom the water wisdom. The wisdom is better than an ecologist who has been working there for a decade or so. They would be looking at the water and they could tell if the fish is going to be there this season or not. They would know by the behavior of a school of fish that if the storm is coming or not. So we are actually missing out a huge amount of data which are standardized, which are believable and trustworthy throughout this process of going only behind data that can be collected through very advanced methodologies. So I believe the traditional knowledge, the knowledge that a fisher is being collecting through their experiences in fishing expeditions, is extremely important and can be formally incorporated into the common framework that UN has been talking about, that can be incorporated and take decisions. This is not only important for this data, this is also important for the sustainability quotient that we've been talking about, that how solutions can be more sustainable. If you involve this community people within from data collection till the date of your project planning and incorporate them within this whole process, your project becomes sustainable. Involvement and empowerment of these communities becomes easier, compliance increases, and most importantly, the inclusiveness that has been talked about throughout this week is so easy to get, right? And one last point I really wanted to incorporate is that throughout this week's the sessions that I have been attended, one point has been very importantly mentioned, that the idea of blue economy, sustainability, these are still in the infancy of framing. We're still trying to frame them. Now, for this framing, it cannot be like one umbrella understanding for all the countries we're talking about, because we're not on the same boat in terms of socioeconomic paradigms and so much other things. If you don't deep dive into the understandings of your fishers, of your communities, how would you frame them? How would you frame your problem according to your own context? And if you don't do that, how can you expect to reach to a sustainable future without this perspective? So I think this incorporation and formalizing of this huge data that's there, sitting there, these eyes in the sea, is extremely important in mending the data gap that we are facing, especially in the Indian Ocean and Bay of Bengal. Yeah.
Alifa, that's fabulous. It's so fascinating. I don't know if it's a new generation of scientific inquiry, but this breaking down the barriers between the kind of quantitative data that you aspire to collect to give more evidence about how to manage a resource, linked to that fascinating, brilliant phrase you used, water wisdom, from the local knowledge, and using almost citizen science, perhaps, but local fisher folk and communities to collect that data, not only from today, but from past knowledge and experience. Is that a way, do you think, that we'll be able to connect somehow from the local to the global? I mean, these sustainable development goals and goal 14 for ocean, they're quite clearly, by definition, it's quite global, and you're talking in a very, very local way, but it sounds like we could somehow connect these two together through the approaches that you're suggesting.
Absolutely. absolutely. And this is important, actually. You can't really reach to your global goals if these communities, if these not are broken down to individual communities and they come together and then goes beyond the idea of that. I would like to give a very simple example from my work that has been doing in the Bay of Bengal region, Bangladesh, with sharks and rays. We have been trying to locate a species called the large-toothed sawfish, which has been exhibited from 43 countries around the world. It's only been found in Australia and Florida and some other African countries. And we thought we also lost the species for more than a decade. And through a network of fishers and their understanding, we actually found the population still exists in Bangladesh, and which is an extremely important population genetically, evolutionary, and also a charismatic species which could work as a flagship as well. And then we ran a lot of workshops just to try and understand how to mitigate these bycatch problems and how to incorporate this knowledge of the fishers about the ecology of the species, because we going there into the sea, it takes a lot of money, and as young researcher we normally don't have that much of money for those expeditions. And we actually, through these workshops, we could identify the critical habitats of those species for habitat level work. We could identify and create a network by which we are actually accounting the bycatch better. And this was an extremely frugal process, which would be needing resource mobilization and allocation is going to be a big deal in the next decade in terms of sustainability if you're thinking about global. So I think it was an extremely important thing. There are communities and indigenous people around the world who have been, as Miali said, sustainably fishing for thousands of years. And then through the industrial scaling up, it has been changed a little bit. Now we have a bigger problem to deal with. But if you deep dive into the understanding of these local people and how sustainably they have been doing their jobs for so long, it might actually very good understanding into how to reach to the global scale. One last.
Alita, that's just throwing so much on the table for us. It's just so fascinating in terms of how one can actually rethink some of these research programs and bring these folks together. I would be very keen to bring Ema back into this, because I saw you nodding whilst Alifa and Miali were talking. This sounds like a kind of an exciting frontier of drawing more people in. It goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of the discussion, drawing more people into the ocean agenda. And they don't just have to be scientists. We've heard it from local communities and activists, and everyone who's been living there has got some data points and some information. It sounds quite exciting. Do you sense we could create a bit more of a movement or a groundswell around the sort of ocean agenda in these ways?
Absolutely. And to be honest, the movement is already happening. So we see young people all across the world mobilizing now, mainly thanks to the wonderful youth of Greta Thunberg. But we can see since that has happened and the revolution has begun, that there's more and more young people and people of every other age getting involved in fighting for ocean stewardship. And one thing that I think is more important now than ever before has been scientists actually trying to incorporate social science in their work. So becoming more interdisciplinary, I think, should be the new way forward for scientists. And I feel that it's so important to now realize how much our research and our science actually does impact people and connect people, and it needs to be more tangible and accessible for everyone. So yes, I echo everything that Miali and Alifa has said there.
Ema, thank you so much. And last word, maybe, Miali, on this, because I saw you nodding as well, where Ema was just talking there. Maybe it was the multidisciplinary nature of the thing, but your reflections on what you've heard. I sense a multidisciplinary movement for ocean health, ocean management, almost inspired by we've seen in the climate side from what you were saying, Ema. Miali, your thoughts there?
Yeah, definitely. There is a need for that, and I think we've improved a bit, but we have to improve a bit more to increase more like input from anthropologists, from sociologists, and I think those will also help us address those issues that were difficult, as Imar said, those discussions that needs input from politics, from economics. those need social sciences, and they're key. And I think in the marine field and in the study of the ocean, there is a new wave of like a social scientist or an improvement of interest in the field. And I think we will see more and more like work. And as Imer said, the need to integrate those knowledge with local knowledge and also with citizen science and those kinds of science, it's coming more and more together. But it's definitely key to address the bigger and the more difficult question we're facing.
Miali, thank you so much. And thank you to the other two panelists here. Now, Dr. Sanyan, CEO of Conservation International. Wow. That was quite exciting. I didn't think we'd go into that sort of level of movement building and multidisciplinary action on the ocean from our next generation of scientists there. We've heard so many great ideas and thoughts. And by the way, thank you also for being a judge on our Uplink Ocean Sprint earlier this week with the innovation side of it. What comes through from that conversation for you? This connection between humans, humanity, and the ocean seems very strong, but we'd really love to get your perspectives and thoughts on what you've heard from just then and the flavors of this week coming through. Are we shifting the ocean dialogue into this more people in the ocean, more sustainable properly, rather than just some of the deep science that's all been pinned upon so far?
Dominic, first of all, thank you, and thank you to the WEF, to Peter Thompson, and of course the Friends of Ocean Action, and to all the panelists I was with. The first thing that comes to mind is these folks are amazing, and I actually want to hear way more from them than from me and you and I, and we get lots of opportunities to speak. And I think that this forum and the way you're doing this is such a brilliant idea. Obviously, it's in response to a global pandemic and a tragedy, but it is allowing us to bring voices into the on the boat or in the tent, if you like, that frankly I would not have the opportunity to hear from. And so Imar, Miali, Alifa, I learned a lot. Thank you so much for your participation. And I feel frankly optimistic that there's this kind of passion, knowledge, maturity, if you want to call it that, sensitivity and thoughtfulness on something that I've spent my whole life caring about. So, look, I think we've got some major barriers to overcome. And I think our speakers, our panelists did touch upon all of these. And I think that survey that you put out there was quite interesting to kick this off. The first thing we need is scale. One of the things that we were challenged with when we did the innovation judging on day one is that we thought all these ideas are great, but we really struggle with how do you scale? Yeah. And I think all of these individuals are struggling with that as well. All of us are struggling with that as well. A project that Conservation International works in Indonesia, which is about creating marine protected areas that involve the community, that get the government to fully support it, so that when you go there and you dive there or you visit there, the fees don't go into the central government, but it goes directly into a trust fund that is then managed for the local organization to manage the Bird's Head seascape, Raja Ampat, the epicenter of marine biodiversity on the planet, manage it sustainably. Now is also providing livelihoods, jobs, food, and resilience for 760,000 people. So one of the things we need to, if we can make the ideas that we have matter to a community, even one community, and it really matters to them, that is the pathway to really scale it and scale it fast into the numbers that we actually need. The second is government. I was surprised, but frankly gratified to see that so many folks on the survey identified government policies and involvement as crucial, particularly when it comes to the oceans. I think it is. I think it's too easy to miss that, and we think about policy and we think, oh my God, it's another law, it's another policy, it can't be implemented. But I've seen too often where the lack of a law or bad law can so subvert and turn upside down the best efforts by private sector, by innovation, by communities. You take blue carbon. right? So blue carbon is our way in which we could protect carbon, and we could protect carbon underwater, in mangroves, in seagrass beds, and then monetize it to some extent because people are willing to pay for it to be protected. It's a fantastic idea. There's such high carbon density. It exists in places like Bangladesh, like Indonesia, like Madagascar, that are severely under threat from rising sea levels and where lots of coastal communities are dependent on the ocean. But to get blue carbon really up and running and to get it scaled, you need government policy. So we have to have the inclusion of government. And then I would finally say resources. One of the things that really I struggle with, you look at how fragile the world is and look how much money is being spent to support industries that are on the verge of collapsing right now. Not millions, not billions, hundreds of billions. We're talking about numbers like trillion. The EU rescue package, 750 million, a billion euros, for example. Then compare it to the amount of money that actually goes to protecting our planet or goes towards oceans. We're in the forefront working with many others to create a private fund for oceans. And it's significant, but it's tiny compared to the scale of the problem. So we need to also be honest about the kind of resources we need. That's I'll sort of stop there, but really very impressed with the panel and really delighted to be here.
Sanyan, thank you so much. Now, Imar, Miali, Alifa, I've never seen Dr. Sanyan so animated on a panel. You've completely hit a nerve there, I think, in this mobilization of kind of citizen science and an ocean movement. If anybody can help you trigger that large-scale action, it's going to be Dr. Sanyan at Conservation International. So I'm looking for all of those digital connects to be whizzing around on the background in our notes channel on the back of this on this panel. Dr. Sanyan, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So there you have it. There you have it. We've had 51 sessions, 304 speakers, 3.5 million viewers, and we're reaching that conclusion, which it seems to me, which our panelists have helped to stoke here, we could be opening up this movement, scaling this movement between people and ocean, between scientists and communities, between activists and business, the ocean SDG to the world. And with that, I'm delighted and honored that the United Nations Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean, Peter Thompson, whose brainchild it has been to drive this agenda to all corners of the economy, of society, of the youth, of scientists, and make this SDG really accelerate itself in combination with Kenya and Portugal. COVID crisis or no COVID crisis, this drumbeat has accelerated, and we should all have a big debt of thanks to Peter Thompson, the Secretary General's Special Envoy, who has promoted this relentlessly. Peter, the baton is now handed back to you. We're at the end of the week of the virtual ocean dialogues. Over to you, sir, to close us out. Peter Thompson.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Kind words. Well, my first reaction after that intense week of the virtual ocean dialogues has to be something like, wow, the world's got talent. I suppose more than most, I'm aware of the immense stresses on the ocean's health, but I come out of this week full of hope. I feel my head just buzzing with all the positive ideas and action programs and solutions that I heard this week from our participants at all levels, from heads of government to business leaders, intergovernmental representatives, marine scientists, youth representatives, NGO specialists, and innovators. The statistics of the virtual ocean dialogue summarized at the beginning of this session by Dominic Warre are nothing short of extraordinary. 630,000 live stream views across all channels, 3.35 million views of Instagram stories, 304 speakers from 54 countries, just to mention a few. Through the dialogues, we've been witness to an extraordinary outreach and an extraordinary intellectual advancement for ocean action. Everything is connected, and that includes SDG 14 with all the other 17 sustainable development goals. So connectivity of communities with all aspects of the ocean was reflected in the design of the sessions of the virtual ocean dialogues. and the financing of the sustainable blue economy to stemming the tide on marine plastic pollution. From the ocean's nourishing of humanity's billions to harnessing the powers of innovation and data. From global, from global priorities for marine protection to governance of the high seas, and so much more. The virtual ocean dialogues left no pearly shell unturned. I was particularly inspired by the inclusivity of the dialogues, by the enthusiasm and the acumen of the questions coming in from the global audience as we went down into over 40 deep dives on more specialized issues. I must say my only frustration is I couldn't attend every event. But the good news is that each of the main sessions of the Virtual Ocean Dialogues can be watched on the World Economic Forum's website. I, for one, intend viewing every event of the week through this facility. What a treasure trove of information and ideas. I have the satisfying role as the closing speaker of thanking some people and organizations without whom the Virtual Ocean Dialogues could never have been the enormous contribution that they have to the cause of a healthy ocean. From the top, I have to thank the World Economic Forum, which has so generously put its technical resources, expertise, and global reach at the disposal of the Friends of Ocean Action in order to make the dialogues the great success they've certainly been. Merci beaucoup et dankeschön. I particularly want to give thanks to the forum's Dominic Warrett, Don't Blush, and Gaia Felber. I'm sure you're listening. And then to all the leaders and the panelists and the experts who dedicated their precious time to the dialogues. Quite obviously, we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you also to the Friends of Ocean Action themselves, most especially to our tireless director, Christian Telecki, who served at the fulcrum of organizing and delivering the Virtual Ocean Dialogues. To his team at the Friends of Ocean Action and to everyone who participated in the dialogues, I give heartful thanks with the Fijian words of Vinaka Wakalevu. The call for ocean action is as urgent as ever. Thanks largely to our anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, the ocean's health continues to decline, and we still have some very bad habits to correct in our fishing and pollution. We're turning to innovation and science to reverse that decline, which is why when we gather in Lisbon for the next UN Ocean Conference, we will convene under a theme of scaling up ocean action based on science and innovation, with partnerships and solutions at its heart. When we have gathered the insights and findings of these virtual ocean dialogues, we will learn many lessons that can be used in the organization of the UN Ocean Conference. How, for example, to best utilize virtual participation. Most importantly, our summary findings from this week will enrich the preparations and interactions of the UN Ocean Conference, in particular in its 8 interactive dialogues. The winner in all this will be the implementation of SDG 14, our universal goal to conserve and sustainably use the ocean's resources. Once the dates are announced, I look forward to spending the week of the UN Ocean Conference with many of you in Portugal. It thus gives me great pleasure to bring the virtual ocean dialogues to a close with an au revoir and the forward-looking message of see you in Lisbon.
Thank you so much, Peter. And for those closing words and those great thanks. And I must also say a big thank you on behalf of the whole global ocean community to you for being the special envoy for the Secretary General that the world needs right now to take this agenda forward into Lisbon. So it's goodbye from us at the Friends of Ocean Action and the World Economic Forum for this week of virtual ocean dialogues. Thanks to all the 3.5 million who have engaged. Before we go, I think, and Peter, you mentioned Gaia's name. I don't know if there's any others of the team who are literally behind the screen that I'm looking at, but if you are there, do come over here and give a wave to all of those who've been watching your work all week to say goodbye. So Gaia, if you're there, if anybody else from the team is there, do come up here and give a wave to say goodbye. Here's Gaia, who's been the architect along with Christian Telecki, who's based in London, so can't physically be with us. But thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you enjoyed the week. Say thank you very much, Gaia.
Thank you very much for everyone who followed us throughout the week. We look forward to continuing the engagement. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And with that, the Virtual Ocean Dialogues are closed. Thank you all so much for listening. Goodbye.